Welcome to SOAR, a brand new show here live on the Recovery Star Worldwide Network. This is sponsored by the Renaissance Recovery Center, and I am so excited to introduce the two new hosts of this show, SOAR, right here. My name is Heidi Fogelsong. I'm one of the hosts here on the Recovery Star Worldwide Network, and we are so excited to be devoting this time and energy for new conversations about addiction, resources for recovery, and our social responsibility to start talking and ultimately start affecting some change here in our society and in our communities. So please help me welcome to my immediate left, Steve Brown of the Renaissance Recovery Center and Mike Jensen, also with the center. Thanks for being with us here, guys, and I'm excited to have you on board.
Thanks, Heidi. Good to be here.
It really is. Thank you, Heidi.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about why you're here. Steve, I'm going to start with you. I'd like to really understand a little bit about who you are, how you got into this profession called recovery, and a little bit about the purpose of this show and program.
Well, who I am, what got me into the profession of recovery was actually a personal experience with addiction and recovery and generations of addiction in my family. So I have spent years in and out of addiction myself, sobered up in 1996. And about 2 or 3 years later, I had some sense that I needed to get into the field and take it from not just an avocation to a vocation. I'd spent a lot of time and energy working with fellow recovering addicts and had a brother who sobered up shortly after I did. And over the course of about 2 or 3 years, we had some thoughts, some ideas. Both had very deep, I think, spiritual and faith-based experiences as well, and decided that we wanted to devote our lives to helping fellow suffering addicts find the recovery that had been given to us, and to be able to start a center that not only utilized the best, most sound clinical practices and evidence-based practice, but also to be able to integrate what we thought would be more of a fullness, comprehensive approach to what we believe to be the ultimate foundational solution to addiction recovery, and that is a spiritual component that we thought the more we can integrate those two, the more effective the program would be. We started a program called Renaissance Ranch up in Park City, Utah, about 12 years ago, and that has evolved over time. I've since started a couple of different outpatient centers, and most recently relocated to Gilbert, Arizona, and where we're currently running an intensive outpatient program.
So you have the birth of the Renaissance Recovery Center. Boy, I'm having a hard time saying that. You come together as really a community. Help us understand what this is really like. I don't think people get addiction. And of course, now it's a health issue. It's not moral behavior. It is a disease. It is not about acting out and being a bad person. Help us understand this big beast we call addiction.
Well, I think for years without proper technology, I think years ago, and even the founders, for instance, of Alcoholics Anonymous, and some of with the best medical technology and understanding they had in those days, they understood that there was a lot more going on that created this phenomenon of craving or compulsion, as they call it, that caused really good people to act out in some pretty horrible ways. Coming at it from more of a perspective of a religious or Judeo-Christian context of that day, the only way they really knew how to explain it was that it was a character issue, it was a sin, that there was something wrong with the moral fiber of a person, that they continued to make such bad choices despite what they knew. So clearly there had to be more operating with a person, where so many people, when they got under the influence, would degenerate to a point where they would make choices that caused so much damage to themselves, to their families, so much loss, so many destructive consequences of addiction. What we know today is a lot more about addiction in the brain, so certainly we know that there are neurobiological forces at play. Certainly choices involved, or no one would ever get involved in addiction in the first place, and no one would ever be able to get sober if they didn't have some determination or sense of capacity to exercise will or choice. But mitigated by that are a lot of physiological factors, literally where the values, the better judgment, sound reasoning, common sense, morality, a sense of right and wrong, a knowledge of right and wrong, are overridden by a physical process that happens, and also an emotional and a psychological and spiritual issues that compel addicts to continue to go more deeply into a compulsive cycle. I personally believe even prior to picking up, there's a lot of pre-existing things in place. We're just talking about the biological factors right now, the neurobiology, the genetics, and so on, that play such a significant role that we understand today that, again, compromise or influence choice or the capacity to properly use choice and agency and our free will. I think there are other compelling factors. Shame. A lot of people have such horrible, grotesque belief systems about who they are that compel them to act in ways that they wouldn't otherwise act if they had a healthier sense of self and identity. Then it becomes kind of a self-fulfilling, self-reinforcing process they get into. The more they act out, the farther they degrade, the more it reinforces this belief that they're worthless and horrible, and they start to really believe that's who they are. That can be compelling too, because people who feel worthless also don't feel like they have a lot of choices.
My stomach is hurting as you talk. This is my visceral reaction as you really talk about the pain of addiction, but also the prevention to really feel like there is a place or a reservoir to get help and for recovery. Mike, I'd like to bring you in. Again, we're talking with Steve Brown, Renaissance Recovery Center, here on the program SOAR, and we want to make sure that we get a lot of listeners here to join in this conversation. Mike Jensen, you are also with Renaissance Recovery Centers. The two of you are going to be hosting this show. What is the impact and what is the real driving force to be here in front of these microphones to talk about this stuff?
Sure. Thank you, Heidi. Well, SOAR is an acronym for Series on Addiction Recovery. And the impact, we hope, will be very significant, because never before in the history of man has there been more avenues, more ways for people to become addicted. You know, if we look back through the last 100 years, and heroin was there and cocaine was there was opium. These things still exist today. In fact, heroin is probably, it absolutely has made a big comeback, and it's one of the biggest social problems. But on top of that, we have all the synthetic drugs, we have all the prescription drugs, and oftentimes these are gateways into other illicit drugs. So, excuse me, the addiction is an epidemic today. And there's not a family out there that they're, whether it's their child or their brother or their mother, their father or their neighbor, that is suffering from addiction. And so there's just a tremendous social need for programs out there, and that's what we aim to do at Renaissance Recovery Center, is we provide a program to help people that have fallen into the trap of addiction one way or the other. And oftentimes these things happen, they go to the dentist and they begin taking medication and they like it, and it parlays into illicit activity. But there's just such a need out there for people to fully understand that addiction is not a character failing. It's not what bad people do, but it's a sickness, and that there is a disease component both in the body and in the mind. And what we believe very strongly at Renaissance Recovery Center is that in terms of the body, the first thing that has to happen is people have to stop using. In terms of the mind, they have to understand that this is in fact a disease, that they're not a bad person, but that there's a spiritual solution. And that's what we believe. That's what we talk ourselves, we're faith-based. The 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, in essence, which are used in the recovery field worldwide in one way or the other, they are a process to help someone to find a power greater than themselves. And that's how recovery happens. And there's a lot of people who are reticent about this. Well, I don't want to talk about spiritual things. But the fact is, Steve and I both have recovered from what we call a hopeless state of mind and body, and it's a spiritual process. In my past, I didn't know this weekend coming up if I was going to get drunk or not. Now I know that I'm not. I know that I can easily control my desire to drink alcohol because I've gone through this process. That's what we teach at Renaissance Recovery Center. And, if anybody has any questions, we certainly would welcome any phone calls at 480-632-1345. Again, it's 480-632-1345. But in a nutshell, why we're here and what we do is that we know that there is a big social problem today in terms of addiction, and that the need for recovery has never been greater. There are a lot of different what we call easier, faster modalities out there that people will promise certain things in certain ways. And look, some of these things have some merit, but we know that recovery is a process, and it's something that people need their hand held through time, and even beyond that, and that their lives can become greater than they ever thought they could be. And so, that's a little bit about what we're about.
Okay. We are here with Mike Jensen and Steve Brown of the Renaissance Recovery Center. This is the show SOAR, live here on the Recovery Star Worldwide Network. Before we go to break, Steve, this is such a complex issue. There is so much information we have to wade through. Mind, body, spirit, as you are saying, Mike, is really the piece to get there. But how do you ever make that first step from hopeless and down there to even get to any kind of new place of light and opportunity to heal?
That's a good question. And it's something ultimately that only each person can control. You hear this idea, they talk a lot about a bottom, right? Like it's some random place that hasn't happened yet, that we have no control over when it's going to be, that I'm just a statistic, and at some point, at some other determined time, I'm going to hit this mythical bottom where I will suddenly decide that I've had enough. You hear it said a lot in recovery circles that the bottom is when you stop digging, when you put the shovel down. I've hit that at a number of different periods in my life. You try to put conditions in place that I think, there's the old saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't force him to drink. But you can salt the oats a little bit. I had to have my oats salted. I had people around me that put conditions in place. I had a lot of loved ones who really didn't know what to do with me. You can't force people to do things against their will. But you can set up conditions that might compel them a little bit when they're not as capable of acting in their own best interest, when their judgment and their ability to care for themselves is compromised, if not, entirely disabled. Ultimately, everyone has to get to that point. I thought I was beyond hopeless. I see a lot of people who thought they were beyond the point of no return. One thing Mike mentioned earlier was that seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. Operative word being seemingly. When you're in that dark place, it seems hopeless. It doesn't mean that it is. Things are not always as they seem. That can be a very humiliating place to be. At some point, it can also be humbling. And everyone, no matter how far they've gone down this scale, no matter how beyond help or reach they believe they are, that's a lie. But everyone has to decide at some point that they've had enough and find the will to at least arrest the symptom. As Mike was saying earlier, we're dealing with symptoms. Ultimately, the acting out the addictive behavior is a symptom that has to be arrested at some point. Everyone has to decide to turn away from that solution that has become such a severe problem and has taken utter control over their lives. But it still started as a solution. So there's a reason people have so much difficulty giving it up, because it did work for them for a while, even though it ends up robbing you of everything it's promised and then some. it still works. Otherwise, people would not continue to do it despite the horrific and extreme losses and the toll that this disease will exact on them.
And that's why we're doing this show, and you and Mike are here to reach out to those in need and also to the rest of people out there who really need to understand addiction and, most importantly, the hope for recovery. Can you give us the number one more time, Mike, for the Renaissance Recovery Center if people want to call for a loved one, for information, or maybe for themselves?
Sure, absolutely. The phone number locally is 480-632-1345. Again, 480-632-1345. Also, you can visit us online at renaissancerecoverycenter.com. Now, a lot of people may go to their dictionary to learn how to spell Renaissance. It's not that hard. It's RENAISSANCE. So, renaissancerecoverycenter.com, and give us a call. We're happy to help anybody with anything any questions they may have.
All right, Teacher Mike, we appreciate it. We are going to take a break. When we come back, more on the program SOAR, from those who have lived the life of addiction into recovery and are now sharing it with all of you. Mike and Steve, live here on the Recovery Star Worldwide Network. Click on recoverystarworldwide.com. Listen live or on demand anytime you want. We'll be back.
It's easy hiding my heroin habit from my parents. If I'm tired or don't eat, I'm just acting like a typical kid. I hide my stash in my room because I know my parents would never snoop. They don't notice the missing painkillers either, or the money I take from their wallets, but I think they're gonna notice this.
I'm Nassau County District Attorney Kathleen Rice. Would you know if your child was using heroin? To learn more, please visit heroinprevention.com.
Welcome back to SOAR, live here on the Recovery Star Worldwide Network, a network devoted to exploring the issues of addiction, the hope for recovery, and also understanding the complexity of what really is a health issue. It is so beyond emotions and behavior. This is truly getting to the root of a person's struggle. Renaissance Recovery Center is the sponsor of this new program, SOAR. I'm Heidi Fogelsong, and I'm just here sitting in on this fascinating conversation with the two hosts of SOAR, Steve Brown, who is also the man who heads up Renaissance Recovery Center. Welcome back, Steve. And Mike Jensen, who is also part of the Renaissance Recovery team and really the person to help us walk through right now that depth of despair and addiction and the transition to recovery. And Steve, it really is a step-by-step process. And Mike, you can walk us really through those steps, can't you?
Well, absolutely. And Steve and I both, having been in recovery for some time now, and that the drugs and alcohol are not a part of our lives anymore, but they were a significant part when we were younger. And what I'd like to do right now, purely from a standpoint of a recovering alcoholic and addict, talk about what my life was like a little bit and why it was that way, why it stayed that way, what happened in a sense, and where I'm at today. I think the most important thing to begin when you're talking about anyone with an addiction is that it's important to understand, as we talked about in the first segment, that it is not a moral failing, it's not a character defect necessarily. It's not that people just are bad people, but rather addiction is a living, breathing thing. It is a disease of the body and also a disease of the mind, or we might say even mental illness. Why would someone continue to do something over and over again that produces negative consequences, bad results, protesting from family and loved ones, and yet The people that are addicted, they continue to repeat the same behaviors over and over again. Why do we do that? Well, the first answer for that is that there's a payoff. We feel good in a certain way, particularly early on in most addictions, whether it be alcohol or specific types of drugs. Early on, when you experience this feeling, and it takes away fear, it makes your body feel good, and it removes your inhibitions. A lot of people suffer from some social anxiety a little bit. They're shy. All of a sudden, they're open, and they can, they feel like they found this magic thing in drugs and alcohol. Well, the problem is that it doesn't work that way forever. So, usually you start and like with alcohol, for example, I remember the first time I drank when I was 14, and I remember thinking, wow, this feels so amazing and feels great. And I held on to that for much of my life, even when it stopped working. And, eventually that's what happens when drug and alcohol use turns to addiction, is when a person can't help using. They may wake up in the morning and say, look, I'm not going to use today. But by 5 o'clock, they're loaded. And they repeat this over and over again. And the failing of most addicts is that they feel that by their own self-will or their own intent of their heart, their own motivation, that they can muster up enough of this that they can beat the game by themselves. And I tried this over and over again, and it just failed. And meanwhile, I felt worse and worse about myself because I was in conflict. The things I wanted to do, I wasn't doing. The things I didn't want to do, I continued to do. And so this began to effectually fill me up with shame and guilt. And shame and guilt for the addict are, they're like pouring gasoline on a fire. Because if I'm feeling something negative, particularly emotionally, or if I'm feeling pain, and I know that in a very short order I can take or do something and that can go away, and that's what the addict does, is they use regardless of consequences. And so the things of import, like your job or responsibilities at home, these kinds of things, they begin to give way to the abuse. And so this is what happens with addiction. And again, as I said, we all know people that are addicted. Well, what I ultimately had to learn was that for me, it was primarily alcohol. Alcohol was a power greater than myself. It really was. When I wake up in the morning, it would talk to me. I would have a conversation. Am I going to use? Am I not going to use? Or what am I going to drink tonight? Is it going to be wine? Is it going to be whiskey? Is it going to be beer? What's it going to be? And so I had this dialogue all the time with alcohol. It was talking to me. And it was powerful. Once I began drinking, we talked about this physical craving, or Steve mentioned earlier, phenomenon of craving, which actually is no longer a phenomenon today. 76 years ago, Dr. Silkworth, who wrote the foreword to Alcoholics Anonymous, described it as a phenomenon of craving. And he said, look, once an alcoholic takes a drink, they then have an overwhelming compulsion to drink more. Well, science has shown us now how this works. We know this, and we're not going to go into this today. But the bottom line is that a true alcoholic, once they take a drink, and this was my case, I could not stop drinking, and I would drink myself to oblivion. In the end, and I entered recovery in 1998, and the first few years were pretty rough for me. But in the end, once I would start drinking, I would drink for several days and end up in the hospital. And I would call 911 on myself. I was just, that's what would happen. But realizing that alcohol and drugs is a power greater than me, the first thing I need to do is recognize that look, this is a big part of my life. Using alcohol and drugs and addiction takes a place of so many other things, and that really they run my life. We talk about the word unmanageable. Well, really what unmanageable means is that the role of drugs and alcohol play an overly important role in one's life, and they dictate and they limit you in things that you can't do. So in understanding that alcohol had a grip on me, it talked to me, and it was causing a lot of problems in my life, the first thing I had to do was, admit that, yes, this is a problem. And from that, and I'm going to really streamline this, but I had to realize that in order for me to overcome the power of alcohol, I need a power greater than me. And I found that power evidenced in many ways. ultimately it came in my belief in God. But I couldn't just go from in one day 1,000 miles an hour to tapping into the power of God. I needed some help, and I got that through my peers that had gone through this, through a mentor or a sponsor, through professional groups we run an intensive outpatient, this type of thing. I knew I needed support. I couldn't do it myself. And so as I began to believe that, yes, there's a power greater than this, my own power and the power of alcohol, and I need to figure that out, that's really what our program is about, is figuring out that power. That's really what the best recovery models are about, is helping someone to gain a power that's greater than the power that's destroying their lives. The beautiful thing about that is that once that occurs, once we're able to tap in and find this power greater than ourselves, greater than our addiction, our lives take this vein of being so positive, so amazing. As Steve mentioned earlier, the addict is seemingly hopeless in his mind and body, and I really believed it. I believed that, I will never be able to overcome this. This is alcohol is part of my life, and I thought, this is just it. And there were many times I accepted it. Well, something happened. I had a brother who was also an alcoholic, but he got into hard drugs, and it'll be 10 years in October that he passed away of an overdose. And when he passed away, we had an open house, and it was just amazing. Family after family had come in, and they began to tell us their stories of addiction within their family. And we began to see exactly how prevalent this is. And so, in the shortest of explanations, and really kind of streamlining what we do and how recovery works, is that we help take someone that is out of control under the power that is driving them down through drugs and alcohol, to realize that this is happening, to find a power greater than themselves, and then to begin to live a more productive life. And we're very passionate about it, Steve and I, and we have a great counselor, Lindsay Greenman, who understands all the modalities of recovery, but primarily we operate under, there was a power greater than me that was hurting me. I need a power greater than me that can help me, and that's why we determine ourselves as faith-based.
Okay. We are talking with Mike Jensen, really explaining the first steps, and also talking with Steve Brown, Renaissance Recovery Center, and the launch of this new show, SOAR. Steve, I want you to build on what Mike was saying, and it's so powerful to hear the personal journey, but most importantly, over and over again, what I'm hearing to be the most significant, effective way to heal is really with that lesson of surrender, and that first step of turning it over to someone, some entity, something bigger.
I really think we're fundamentally talking about a human condition issue here. I mean, my experience has been that ultimately for people to achieve higher levels of joy, happiness, freedom, to grow and develop and evolve personally, whether it's emotionally, spiritually, all these different areas of our lives, I believe there needs to be some concession at some point that there's only so far we can take ourselves on our own power. Some need for some sense of our own limitations. I come from a really wonderful family of very high achieving, very ego-driven, wonderful people that could get by a lot longer out there on their own power than I could, but ultimately it fails all of us, right? Don't want to go off too much on a tangent, but I'm actually grateful today that I had a disease that kicked my butt and compelled me to accept the fact of how utterly powerless I was, not just to overcome the use of a substance. Again, the substance is more of a symptom. When you're talking from a 12-step paradigm, and that's not all we do, there's so many different modalities of treatment that we employ at Renaissance Recovery Center. A foundation of what we do is the 12-step model, but we use smart recovery. We focus on cognitive behavioral issues, emotional issues, family systems, really focusing probably the most on rooting out the effects of shame, which I really believe is a core cause of addiction, taking all the other biological and other issues into account. At some point, we have to accept that we can't control it. The loss of control isn't always evident in how much we use or for how long we use, or our inability to stop using. Certainly those are factors. A marker of addiction is you can't really predict when you're going to use or how much you're going to use. But alcohol and drugs were a symptom of powerlessness for me, not the cause of it. I became powerless, meaning a loss of control over drugs and alcohol. That line for me was crossed long before I really I accepted it. A lot of people conceded that for me well before I did for myself. And ultimately, we still have a disease of self-diagnosis. Everyone has to come to terms with it in that way. My biggest issue was I had periods of sobriety, and drugs and alcohol were symptoms of my powerlessness, not the cause of it. I used because I was powerless. What that felt like for me is I didn't have a sense of worth. I had intense anxiety and depression that I couldn't overcome on my own, despite all my best efforts and the best devices and abilities I could employ. And, I had some ability. Self-help, motivational, personal development. I lived it, I sold it, I coached it. Exercise, all these things that I tried, very well-meaning and all inherently good things. But on my own power, I could not affect that enough in my life to have the change sufficient to where at some point I didn't turn back to substances to gain the power, that sense of worth, that sense of being enough, that sense of wholeness, that sense of fullness. So I would turn back to substances to meet those needs. And again, a counterfeit, they end up turning and robbing you blind, right? So at some point, what we have to address is the real condition of powerlessness that leads us to drugs and alcohol, which is a very holistic approach. And that's some of the things that we try to do at Renaissance Ranch, is help the addict really start to deal with some of those underlying causes and conditions.
The root of the root, as
the
they
root
call it.
of the root, and root that stuff out.
All right. We're going to get more into the root of the root. Mike, what I'd like you to do right now is take it to break here on the Recovery Star Worldwide Network. Give the information people can use to find out more about the Renaissance Recovery Center, and also your website. You've got a lot of great content here today on this show as well. So if you can do that and take us to break, Mike.
Okay, very good. The phone number to reach us is 480-632-1345. Again, 480-632-1345. On the web, you can find us at renaissancerecoverycenter.com. Also, you can go through the Recovery Star website through Double Wide, right?
Actually, it's Recovery Star. You can go to recoverystarworldwide.com and check out the icon SOAR.
SOAR. And we have a great icon, SOAR, Series on Addiction Recovery. Today's our inaugural, just getting to know you a little bit, and we'll be back in just a minute. Hello and welcome back to Renaissance Recovery Center's SOAR, our series on addiction recovery. My name is Mike Jensen. I'm here with Clinical Director and Owner Steve Brown. Before the last break, Steve was talking about the root of the root, and that's kind of an intriguing topic. So Steve, would you like to expand and take us away on the root of the root?
I would. I think where we left off, and ultimately what came to mind at the break, was there are needs that are met by addictive behavior. Those needs don't go away when the substance goes away. There's a reason, I think, and there's so many different reasons that people will continue with or go back to addictive behavior, and I really believe at the core we're talking about unmet needs. And those needs must be pretty strong and overpowering. If people will continue to turn back to a behavior that cause so many negative consequences that for some cause loss of life. I mean, I know people, and I was one of them, how many times I was near death. I know a lot of people, friends and family included, who have literally died. And a day later, an hour later, sometimes even if it's a year later, will go back to doing the very thing that killed them, or that landed them in jail, or that caused them to lose one or two families, to sacrifice their profession, their sense of self-esteem, their sense of identity. There's so much loss that comes with addiction, and that is what's so inexplicable and I think baffling and even incomprehensible to so many people is, why would you do that? Look what it has done to your life. And that is a baffling question to the addict. They don't know why. We will have explanations. I had my explanations and my reasons and my excuses and my alibis. But I really didn't know why. It didn't jive. It did not add up. It didn't explain why I would do something that caused so much harm to myself and others and have such a seemingly casual or irrational reason for why I would do it. Not that there wasn't some basis or validity to those reasons, but there's got to be more going on. It must be doing something for us so powerfully if we'll continue to do it despite what it's doing to us. Those are the needs we're talking about. And those needs are different for everyone, but we find some real common threads with people who suffer with this affliction, this illness of addiction, of which, again, the drugs and alcohol are just a symptom. The root of the root, I think, and I've never seen anyone come into my program. I've been through plenty of programs myself. I've been in a lot of 12-step meetings. I still believe in them. I've been around addiction and recovery my whole life. One common thread I see among everyone, almost invariably, I've seen very few exceptions to this, is that at some point when people become chemically dependent, they really have a real loss of sense of self. We're fundamentally dealing at the core with issues of shame. These aren't new concepts, but they're concepts that we, I think, have identified and address very seriously, in a very comprehensive way, and I think very effectively at Renaissance Recovery Center, are dealing with these core belief systems that people have that, if not, I think, identified and rooted out, will continue to get people back into some type of compulsive addictive behavior. For people that struggle with drug addiction, any type of compulsive addictive behavior will leave them more prone to going back to substance addiction. There's reasons, again, back to dopamine, a lot of things going on in the brain, but I think ultimately it's identifying and really starting to heal and resolve and flush out the effects of that shame. John Bradshaw called it toxic shame. Again, these aren't new things we're talking about here, but there's still certain techniques that can be applied to help people, one, let their guards down enough to get vulnerable. I really think when we're talking about this need for power, that the substance gave us an illusion of, is this sense of being okay or being enough. When people get sober, you just don't start feeling those things. There's a lot of work and technique that needs to go into recovery. In fact, a lot of people might feel worse for a while. You're left with this condition of powerlessness and no way of relieving it. Defense mechanisms will come up. We'll get in our heads. We'll try to fix ourselves. We'll try to gain insight and awareness, and we'll educate ourselves. And ultimately, what we're trying to help people do is bring down the barriers, the defense mechanisms, the blocks that keep them from really feeling the pain that they almost killed themselves over. That pain must be so enormous. The proof to that is people wouldn't go to such destructive lengths, even death, to not have to feel it. So when you hear that expression, recovery, I'd rather die than feel, that's what that means to me. People will make choices that will kill them in order to not have to feel or experience effects of shame, of mental illness, of a lot of other issues that can be so extraordinary and overwhelming that they keep continuing to go back to these compulsive cycles and to stay in them despite the enormous loss.
And Steve, the way everything you just said really speaks to me. I think, Steve and Heidi, that when I was a teenager, I went through kind of a humanoid mitosis. And what I mean by that is I think I split into two people. And to me, the addict, I think, exists in two people. And that's where this conflict and this guilt and shame comes from. The new person that came from my addiction was someone that would lie, would cheat, would steal, would always seek to project an image that was a facade. It wasn't true. Because I began, and I see this now, at the time I didn't, I began to want to protect my ability to use when I wanted to. And if I didn't have money, if I had to go into my mom's purse, I would do it. And I know, older, I would do stupid things. I might do take a title loan out on a car or something because I didn't have enough money. These kinds of things I never would have done. Recovery, for me, helped me get back to that one person. See, when I existed in two people and when I was in conflict and there was this addict side of me, which ultimately I did not like, and Steve and I will both agree, we just don't believe that people in the throes of addiction are happy. They're not happy. And yet people come to them and say, why don't you just stop? People that are in pain because their loved ones are in addiction, they try so many things out of desperation. They'll take everything away. They'll give them everything, in the opposite extreme. They'll send them somewhere far, far away, yet to find that they just get in the same trap again. Well, a person that exists in two people where the appetites, the desire to feel the effects of drugs and alcohol, as long as that still exists, the real person they feel that they are becomes stifled and becomes overpowered.
Mike, that's a great point too, because there is kind of this, I call it a mutation we go through, and I think people start to fall away or decompose from who they really are. Now, many never had a sense of that to begin with, which is one of the reasons they became chemically dependent. And then this process of addiction almost becomes this, they gather more evidence or verification or validation for what no good, what's they think they are. Addicts are the most self-loathing, self-judging, self-condemning people in the world. We might put up a lot of defenses around that, but at the core, no matter how it appears on the surface, I really believe we're dealing with a disease of self-hate. And people really think that that's who they are, not just this disease they have. Now, calling it a disease, that can be controversial for some. How do you reconcile or accommodate choice when you're calling this a disease? And the reality is it can be both. It's a disease that involves choice. What understanding, not using it as a cop-out or as an excuse, but to explain why people do, not only helps the loved ones of addicts understand more of what's going on, it doesn't make it easy for them to live with, because you know what? There's no way around it. It results in bad behavior, and there are moral implications. I did a lot of really immoral things by anyone's value system. From a religious paradigm, there's sin involved, but we're not talking about bad people. We're talking about people that really good, sick people that do bad things, and that can help to better explain or mitigate why those processes occur. That also doesn't absolve or give an addict an excuse to not take responsibility or accountability for their behavior, because no matter what compelled me to do it, I still did it. And I had to own it, and I had to take responsibility for cleaning it up. And I also had to take responsibility to make the changes in my life that kept me from going back into such a way of life that I abhorred and the people around me detested. They hated seeing me suffer, and they hated being victims and feeling the effects of my suffering. But there's a big difference between just a bad guy and a really sick guy who's doing some pretty bad things. And those are issues people really have to try to struggle with and wrestle with and need to resolve early in the recovery process.
And Steve and Mike, you both are doing such a great job. I'm going to let the two of you continue this conversation, but I leave you with a question, and that is what you're talking about, the cycle of recovery, relapse, repeat, and how we can get to the next point when it is a process of having just relapse, and then recovery and no repeat. So that's something to talk about and to pick up on. But you all are doing a great job. I wish you the best of luck and keep this conversation going. It is absolutely fascinating.
Thank you, Heidi. I think that one of the most important distinctions that someone with an addiction needs to understand, I call it the diet analogy. How many people out there listening are, in America, we're overweight, right? I mean, we're the most overweight nation in the country. So how many people have decided that they're going to lose weight? And what do? They maybe they buy a book, or they make a plan. They tell everybody they're going to do it.
I did the popcorn diet, the lemonade cleanse, and so much more.
Okay, there you go.
And it all came back.
And it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, right? The diet industry. When really it comes down to a simple formula: is if you expend more calories than you take in, you're going to lose weight. I mean, yet there's $1 billion.
You sound like
industry
my
behind it.
mother. Eat less and exercise.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, good. Well, you're making the point is that to understand an addict and why they continue to do what they do, take a look at your own life, whoever you are. And let's use the weight analogy. If you've wanted to lose those 20, 30 pounds, and you've been saying this for 10 years, and ask yourself this question: why haven't you done it? I mean, you've used all your self-motivation. You've bought the food, you've bought the books, you have the knowledge, you have the understanding. You know that carrying this extra weight is not good for you. You know you look and feel better when you lose that weight, yet why haven't you done it? Well, it's the same thing for someone that's addicted to something. And then where people will say to them, why don't you just stop? Why don't you just stop at 2 drinks? And so people come up with all these ideas of why don't you just do this, but it is as hard as losing those 30 pounds that we almost everybody can identify with. Yet it's even harder beyond that, because yes, it's a choice to use the first time. But the problem is with drugs and alcohol is once you use, these substances have addictive properties. And depending on our genetic predisposition, a lot of other factors, once we've made that initial decision, but the drugs and alcohol are inside of us, we lose this power of choice. It really takes over. And it becomes just like the person that wants to lose the 30 pounds. It never gets done, and so the addict continues to use. At Renaissance Recovery Center, we can help. Call us, 480-632-1345. Again, 480-632-1345. Or find us on the web at renaissancerecoverycenter.com. We'll be back in a moment.
Every 30 minutes, another innocent person is killed due to a drunk driver.
My best friend.
My brother.
My poor grandchild.
My sister.
My father.
My husband.
My mom. My mommy.
Well, I've been afraid of changing, 'cause I've built my life around you.
Stop these tragedies before they happen. Don't drink and drive.
Welcome back to the series on addiction recovery, SOAR, brought to you by Renaissance Recovery Center. We are located in Gilbert, Arizona. You can find us online at renaissancerecoverycenter.com. Also, you can call us with any questions that you might have regarding addiction and recovery at 480-632-1345. My name is Mike Jensen. I'm the operations director. Also, I'm in recovery here with Steve Brown, who is the executive director and the clinical director. And we're going to turn it back to him in a moment. But in the last segment, we were talking about an analogy of losing weight compared to stopping an addiction. And the point we're really trying to make, and Steve's going to expand on this in a minute, is that the issues of addiction and recovery are very complex. There's nothing really simple about it. There are so many elements of addiction. There are financial issues, physical issues, emotional, biological, psychological, social, environmental, and spiritual. There are so many components of things that need to be dealt with. And this is something that we do at Renaissance Recovery Center, is we help people work through all the different elements and complexities of addiction so that they can develop a plan to provide success, that they can be recovered from this hopeless state that we've been talking about. And so this is our inaugural show. Executive Director Steve Brown. What do you have to say, Steve?
Well, one thing I can absolutely guarantee anyone who comes into contact with us, and again, we will be glad to do assessments, professional or personal. You want to come in, and I'll guarantee you'll talk to myself or Mike or Lindsay. We take a very personal and intimate approach to addiction recovery, and I think at least I started this with recovery in mind, not to necessarily be a treatment program, but to be a recovery and a wellness program. People come into treatment for a lot of different reasons. No one's just happy to be there. If they are, then I got to question their sanity, because it just doesn't work that way, or their level of honesty. So it just doesn't matter to me why people come in our doors. It's our goal to help people find a way, everyone in their own personal, individual way, to start choosing recovery for themselves. And that's ultimately our goal, is to facilitate that process for them. But one thing I know is if they come in, they're going to talk to people personally. It can be assessed and evaluated. We don't charge any fees for that, or for interventions for that matter. But you're going to come in and talk to one of us. You're not going to, if you call us, you will talk to a live voice, and it will be one of us. You're not going to get a call center. You're not going to get a message. You're not going to get 2 days before you get a call back, or someone who doesn't really know or understand what they're talking about. You're going to get people who deeply care about addiction. And I don't say that as a plug for our program. I say that as something we take very earnestly and very seriously. And that's why we do what we do. What we do is fairly comprehensive. And it's, again, a very individualized approach. I kind of call us more of a boutique treatment center. We'd be kind of the bed and breakfast of treatment. You're going to come in and get a much more personalized care, but you're going to talk to people who are not only recovery people, because there's an element of that. It seems to be in addiction recovery that I don't know if some people see it as more credibility, but there is a degree of empathy that goes with that. But just being a recovery person isn't enough. You have to understand therapy as well. And for some people, they need a lot more than just talking to a recovery person. There's more going on with them that requires more specialized care and more intensive care. And that's what we do, is focus on, first of all, helping people through a detox process, helping them to identify the right resources to deal with mental health, potential medication management, to deal with the effects of shame, with trauma and abuse, to address other compulsive addictive behaviors like you were talking about, Mike, with food. Well, compulsive overeating actually has shortened more of my family members' lives than alcohol. My dad's side of the family, alcoholics and addicts. My mom's side, more food issues. It has actually caused more health problems and shortened more lives on my mom's side of the family, food, than substance addiction has on my dad's side. So you're going to have a lot of these other symptoms that need to be addressed: sexual addiction, pornography addiction, a lot of other cross addiction that can keep people in that cycle and can really inhibit or interfere with, if not entirely undermine, a recovery process. Those things all need to be addressed in very specialized ways. We are a faith-based program, but we're not a faith healing program. We believe people are healed by faith, but not by our faith. And we're not in the business of promoting a faith or imposing our beliefs, but we are very much an evidence-based program. But I'm a Christian. Those are values I espouse. That's been a part of my spiritual path in recovery. I'm not here to impose Christianity. We're here to respect where people are at and help them find a spiritual path. We use principles, I think, that could I've learned through my Christian faith, but I believe to be universal and even eternal principles, that people of any faith, or even who identify themselves as no faith, can start to affect them, those powers in their lives that will enable them to not only overcome the controlling destructive forces of addiction, but to realize and achieve a way of life and dimensions and degrees of freedom that maybe they didn't even have before their addiction. That's where remission to this disease really happens, is when we start to heal emotionally, psychically, spiritually. We lose our compulsion, our desire, our disposition to act out with chemicals. Those are the promises of recovery. These aren't solutions we've come up with. There's nothing new under the sun. These are universal solutions that we've employed because we have found out personally and professionally what puts this disease in remission, and that's what we're devoted to. We don't have to have all the answers. We don't have to be original. We don't have to be inventors of anything. I think we have a skill set that works really well for what we do in a manner of recovery and an approach that's very effective. But our goal is to help people recover and to utilize everything out there that has been proven to put this disease in remission.
You know, Steve, you made a couple really good points I want to just add my 2 cents to. One has to do with the phone calls that we actually take the phone calls. It's 24/7. On the weekends, Steve and I alternate. I mean, that phone, we're picking it up. And usually it's after just a couple rings. If we happen to be busy, we get back with people right away. So, we really encourage people. Again, that phone number is 480-632-1345. The other thing that just kind of hit me hard is that, I think one of our greatest missions is to help the wounded, and the wounded are not just the users. The wounded are also the families. It's the people, the loved ones, whoever they may be. And I think the biggest reason that we can be effective is that we were once wounded ourselves and went through a process of not applying Band-Aids to these wounds, but really going through, I don't want to be too graphic, but, with the scab and the whole thing, and allowing this healing process. Once you become unwounded and become whole again, once you pass from the throes of addiction, the self-hatred and the loathing that Steve was talking about, into where you begin to be real, you realize your potential, you feel good, you're able to control yourself, the trust is being rebuilt with family. Once you get on the other side of this, and this goes for anybody, regardless of your schooling, your education, whatever, once you have gone from that wounded state to being whole again, we all have a special power and ability to help others.
That's a great point too, Mike. We both have family members. We both lost family members to addiction. So I know, we not only understand the suffering of the addict as we've been through that, we also understand the suffering of the family member or the loved one of an addict, which can be extraordinary and can oftentimes need in their own personal way as much help for their own healing as the addict does. We're dealing with a systemic issue. Oftentimes the addict is, as drugs are a symptom to the addict can be a symptom of a family system issue, and that isn't to blame families. There's no one wrong here. No one asked for this illness, but it affects everyone. And being able to provide healing for family members individually and collectively is critical and vital to not only the addict's recovery, but for the restoration of the family system, or the restoration to wellness for each member of the family as they seek it. That's something we're very committed to at Renaissance Recovery Center as well. We realize that this isn't just about addressing the addict, that we have to provide resources for family members, counseling, support groups, workshops that are designed specifically for family members to be able to have their own healing process as well.
Right. Very good. So, Steve, Renaissance Recovery Center has been here in Gilbert for 3 years now, right?
Yes.
And just a little bit more about you, because it's a very interesting story. Again, you founded Renaissance Ranch when in Park City?
We founded that in Park City, Utah, back in 2002, originally actually as an intensive outpatient, and then we moved into men's residential services in 2004. Have since then started another outpatient program up in the Salt Lake City area. And then I moved down here 3 years ago, relocated to Gilbert, Arizona, where we opened our intensive outpatient up in this area.
So what would you say, just a best guess, and you may not be able to find a number, but how many people do you think as a counselor or a therapist that you have worked with, either in a group setting or one-on-one?
Thousands.
Thousands, yep.
And through the course of my personal recovery, which started in 1982, I've not had continuous sobriety since then, but I've been involved in and out of recovery process. I've been close to 20 years sober now, but through that process, as both through my personal recovery and professional work, probably into five figures
right
at that point, but just strictly through my professional work with Renaissance, we've helped and worked with thousands of people.
And I think another important thing that we want our listeners to understand is that at Renaissance Recovery Center, we never try and pound a square peg in a round hole. We get phone calls all the time of people that perhaps they need a different level of care. Sometimes it is less than what we do. Sometimes it's more. But we've established relationships all over the valley, but also all over the country in regards to where people need help, whatever they need, we seek to help people. And we also, we never put down other programs because we understand that in terms of a supply and demand thing, there is such a supply of people that need help. And that the programs that are out there, I mean, we all pat them on the back and we love them because we know that people need help.
I look at this as a cooperative effort. There's a lot of competition out there when you're dealing with any industry or business or market, and ultimately, I mean, you got to make a living at what you do, but that's not primarily what motivated us to do this. And we, by intention, keep a program at a size to where people can get a very personalized hands-on care. We're committed to finding the best resources for everyone who calls us or come in our doors. I'm referring people out literally every day. We can help from detox to different levels of substance abuse treatment to different types of therapy or counseling that would be appropriate for people. We are not going to bring in someone that isn't appropriate for our facility. And if I think there's a place they can get better help, and you know what? Most of the people I talk to might need a different kind of help than I can offer. And that's what we're committed to, is helping people out there who are suffering find the resources and the help they need. That's what drives us. That's our passion. That's our mission statement. And if I didn't approach my work that way, I wouldn't be doing it because it would not satisfy me.
Right. And just to expand on that just a little bit is, there's an analogy that we read about from time to time, and that is that we've been saved from a sinking ship. And, when you're in addiction and you're in the throes of addiction and you're cycling downward, you are, it's like you're on the Titanic and it's going down and there's no escape. But imagine being on the Titanic and before it goes down and being rescued and having your feet on solid ground. I mean, that is what our goal is. You can find out a lot more specific information about Renaissance Recovery Center online at renaissancerecoverycenter.com. Also, you can call us at any time at 480-632-1345. Again, 480-632-1345. As Steve mentioned, it will either be Steve or myself answering the phone call to give you personal attention and help. Well, Steve, this was our first show. How'd you feel about today?
I really enjoyed being here today and hope we got a message out of healing that has maybe touched or helped one soul today. That's what this is about. Appreciate being here.
Absolutely. Okay, very good. Well, we look forward to continue our work here with Recovery Star. We want to thank Heidi Vogelsong for coming in and introducing us today. Again, you can find us on
RecoveryStar.com, RecoveryStarWorldwide.com, RecoveryStarWorldwideNetwork.com. We got them all.
We got it.
There you go. And, of course, you can also Google Renaissance Recovery Center, and we'll pop up there as well. So, anyway, thanks so much. We hope that the people got something out of this today, as Steve said. And, again, give us a call if you have any question, any help that you need. 480-632-1345.